Your Honor, I renew my motion to tender this witness as an expert in crime scene reconstruction.
All right, now within the objection of Ms. Clark, I'll allow the testimony.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Before you start. Or you may proceed, Ms. Carpenter.
Mr. Balish, I'd like you to, yes. What I'm going to first have you do is look at Exhibit 53.
May I stand up, Your Honor? Thank you.
Do you recognize what you're holding?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
It's a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun. It is a 500A model, and it has a serial number. I believe it's T270293. It has a pistol grip, safety mechanism, slide action. It's a 7-shot tubular magazine.
Okay.
I have seen this weapon and test fired it.
Okay. When did you said you've seen that shotgun and test fired it? When was that?
Last week.
Okay. And was I present
It was on the
there?
12th. Yes, you were.
All right. And Detective Sergeant Gurka present?
Yes.
All right. And we did that here in the Dearborn Heights Police Department, correct?
At the shooting range in the police department. That is correct.
All right. Can you tell us about the characteristics of that shotgun?
This is a shotgun that has an overall length in the barrel of approximately 20 inches. It has a pistol grip, and it's unusual in a manner that it has a full tubular magazine that will hold 7 2 3/4-inch cartridges. So you could actually put one in the chamber and have 7 in the tubular magazine. So you could have a capacity of 8 cartridges of 2 3/4-inch length in here. What else is unusual about the weapon is that it's a cylinder bore. And what a cylinder bore weapon means is that the diameter of the barrel, as you put the cartridge in the barrel, and the diameter of the barrel at the end is the same thing. There is no choke on this particular weapon.
What's a choke?
Choke is a restrictor that's put in the barrel, or it's an addition you can put on the barrel, and it's meant to constrict a shot pattern. In other words, if I were a duck hunter, you're going to be shooting ducks at a great distance. This weapon would never reach a duck, even though it's a 20-inch barrel, with the cylinder bore, because the shot begins to spread almost immediately from coming out of this weapon. A duck hunter might use a full choke, which constricts it as much as it can, and the purpose is to hold the shot together for a longer period of time to reach out further.
So if I have this right, you just testified that this shotgun, because it doesn't have a choke, the buckshot, the pellets that are in there immediately start spreading when discharged?
There's no constriction to it, so all of them are going to begin to spread, but when you have a choke on it, it restricts that to begin with, so it forms the pattern tighter. This one does not, and it's going to be spreading almost immediately upon exiting the weapon, and it's going to spread rather dramatically. if I were to fire, would you say the shot in this particular case was a 12 gauge number 4 buck at a distance of 20 feet, the spread on this weapon would be very much and significantly larger than if I used a weapon with the same length of barrel, but it had a full choke. It would probably be half the spread.
Right, and so does that mean if the spread of the pellets, and how many pellets are in, did you have a chance to use the shells that belong to that shotgun?
The Dearborn Heights Police Department provided a box of cartridges, shotgun shells, that were recovered at the scene. These shotgun shells were of the same type of the shotgun shell that was found in the residence. It was a number 4 buck. And a number 4 buck in 12 gauge 2 3/4 is supposed to have 27, essentially 1/4 inch pellets. I chose one by random and cut it open, and it actually had 29, which surprised me. I did not expect to see that misnomer in there, and that still remains with the Dearborn Heights Police Department. But those cartridges that were provided were used for the test shots that I conducted with this firearm.
Okay, and so how many, with the number 4 buck, how many pellets, you said the one that you fired had 29, correct?
It should have 27. This one had 29 that I opened, not the one that the ones that I fired, I have no idea what was in them. The cartridge manufacturer says there's 27. It just surprised me that the only one that I opened had 29.
Okay. The other firearms examiner found a different, found more than 27 also, the one he used. So what does that mean if there's, let's say there's approximately 27 pellets in this shot, and it comes out now without a choke? What's that? Can you show us what that's going to do?
Well, in the construction of these particular shotgun shells, they're in a plastic sleeve. And there's a buffering material, which is a polystyrene. It looks like white sand, but it's a polystyrene plastic, and it's meant to keep the pellets from rubbing up next to each other, flattening out, so that the pellets tend to remain round until they come out of the end of the gun. They'll fly truer. If they scrape along the inside of the barrel, they'll flatten out and they won't be as accurate, and they'll go off in the pattern. So as soon as the air at the end of the muzzle hits that plastic, and the buckshot pellets then begin to disperse. The plastic sleeve and the buffering agent is meant to keep the pellets intact so that they're not damaged until they leave the barrel of the firearm.
Okay. Did you have an occasion to test fire that weapon?
I
You said
did.
You did last week.
I did.
And can you show us what you did and the conclusion you came to after test firing the weapon?
Well, the reason I test fired the weapon was having seen the evidence, which is in court here, this screen and the screen door, and examining that first and looking at the hole in the screen door and making the assumption that after having looked at photographs of the crime scene initially, that this door was at the crime scene in a position prior to the shot being fired. I then measured that, looked at it, and conducted tests to ascertain in my mind how close the muzzle of this shotgun was, if this is the shotgun that caused the hole in the screen using the ammunition that was supplied.
At this point, I have to object because that screen has not been admitted. So if she wants to move for the admission of that screen, then I think that she needs to do that. Because my initial objection to this whole testimony was that he's relying on facts, not in evidence. That screen has not been testified to by anybody, that it is in fact the screen that was recovered from the house. So, I mean,
Your Honor, I could do it real quick. I could either you allow me to recall Detective Sergeant Gurko, who's sitting right here. I know he will say that's the screen and the frame that came from the door. We saw the pictures that have been admitted already. I can do that step and then ask for admission.
Unless Ms. Clark allows you otherwise, then you're going to have to do that.
Okay, Your Honor, then may...
it's just, fine, stipulate to the door.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, yeah, I would like to mark this as defendant's exhibit. I'm going to do, I'd like to admit Mr. Balish's CV as defendant's exhibit 1. And then I'd like the screen itself to be 2 and then the frame 3, please.
Ms. Clark, any objection?
No.
All right, so moved.
Okay, Mr. Blash. Get your last name, I mispronounced it. Your Honor, may I have permission for my witness to come down and show us what he did?
As long as he's going to talk, he needs to speak loudly so it can be recorded,
Can
okay?
I have permission to position myself so I can see what he's talking about? Thank you.
All right.
Okay, Mayor, right there.
You can stand.
Thank you. Got me out here?
Yeah, we'll have
Thank
it
you.
come down here, it's more room. And then if you need any of this stuff, we'll let us know.
Your Honor, Detective Kirk showed this. It was enclosed and sealed in a cardboard container, and he opened it in my presence and presented this as the screen that was in the door. It was
Okay,
very-
before you, can you hear him, sir?
And Detective Rooker presented this as the screen that was at the residence. In reviewing the photographs of the crime scene, this was consistent with the photographs of the screen of this type at the scene. So I made the assumption that this was in fact the screen that was at the crime scene. What was important was the type of damage done to the screen in this particular area and the direction of the force that caused it. It was my opinion that the screen was in the door, and as such, it was placed that the damage to the door was at the open side. If you had a photograph that I could use that demonstrates it as a scene.
If I borrow this, thank you. Hold on, let me put it like this. Would you like a photograph of the screen
Just at the scene in the doorway.
down? Coming up, here is People's Exhibit 16.
Again, reviewing People's Exhibit 16, the door frame is apparent. Here's the opening mechanism of the door, and here's the screen at this location. So the screen, when you approach the residence, is in this. I'm sorry.
Do you want me to get the frame down?
Yeah.
Well, you should hear him.
I'm sorry, I'll be from this side, of course.
So just further, oh, I can just cut this thing. There you go.
Cars need tons of fluids. Transmission.
This would be what is facing the judge is the inside. If I was in a house and you were on my porch, I'd be looking out like this, correct?
This is the position the screen would normally be in the door. It is not the position of the screen at the time that anybody arrived at the scene. As you can see from the photograph, the screen is out, and it's on the inside of the door, so it was positioned somewhat like this. You can see the bar that goes across near the door handle, and it's now in the same position that it is. So this is roughly the approximation of the screen in the door frame here in the courtroom as it was presented at the crime scene itself. Therefore, I made several measurements, but you're trying to get the distance from this level down to the floor. At some point in time, someone also, one of the officers, put the screen back in the door at the crime scene. Right. So the force would have been on this screen, from the inside of the screen, toward the outside. And in looking at it, this is the area that I perceive to be the center area of the hole in the screen.
Cars need tons of.
This hole in the screen is approximately 60 inches from the floor. If you put the screen back in the frame, this hole is now roughly 67 or 68 inches off the floor. And this calculation became important because the victim in this particular shooting was a 5'4" individual, or that individual had been 64 inches tall. If the screen were up in the door at the point in time that the shot was firing at a 64-inch individual, the hole entered the screen at approximately 67 or 68 inches, so by necessity, it would have had to have been pointing downward. However, there's more that would have to be considered. And looking at the front porch, this photograph doesn't show it, but the next photograph of the front porch shows that there's a step down. So the step down is roughly 6 inches. So in essence, the victim is no longer 64 inches high. The victim is now 58 inches high. If the screen were in the door, the entry hole is at 68 inches. The victim's height standing on the porch would be roughly 58 inches. So you would have to have a dramatic downward path, and that is not the case. And when you look at it, in my opinion...
What do you mean? I want to know, if the screen, so
Could
what
you
we're...
hold this, please?
Yeah.
I'll just put that
Yep,
back in.
I got the frame. So let's say, and what I'm going to ask you, in your expert opinion, before the shot was fired, was the screen up intact like this, or was it down like we see in the pictures?
In my opinion, it was out of the frame of the door already.
Before the shot was fired?
And could you hold this and
Yep.
may I pick up the weapon, Your Honor? The weapon is unloaded, it's in a safe condition, chamber is open for demonstrative purposes. I would prefer to point it this way. Could we turn the door that way, Your Honor?
Any way you want.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's nobody back there, I feel more comfortable. So, if the position of the person here holding the weapon, firing it as it is in the door frame, with this weapon, it would have to have been fired something like this to get the downward angle to hit a person that is now, instead of being 64 inches high, the person on the front porch is 6 inches lower. Now, and it's somewhat, I understand, I don't know for a fact, I'm 5'11" now, I guess I'm not quite 6 foot anymore, but I suspect the homeowner is fairly similar in height. So,
Judge, I have to object to that. There's been no testimony about that. That is a fact, not an evidence.
I'm saying I'm approximately 5'11" at this point in time. For me to do this, I would have to hold the weapon in this position. If it's in the frame, shooting downwards, which would result in a remarkable downward wound path in the victim, unless the victim were right next to the screen, looking upwards in an angle that mirrored the angle of the weapon.
How likely would that be? It sounds like the stars have to align and the person is looking up, the shotgun's just right.
I find that difficult to believe. Now, if I could just take the screen out and put it down, now, when you have this position, the person is still in, the person is still at this height, but it is now a much easier angle to obtain with the screen out of the door frame for a person on the inside firing the weapon to the outside.
So your conclusion after doing the accident reconstruction or the crime scene reconstruction here at the Dearborn Heights Police Department with that shotgun and with the frame and the screen, is it your expert opinion the screen was out of place and down approximately 6 to 7 inches when the shot was fired?
That is correct.
Okay. Is there anything, do you need this anymore?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Did you have a chance to review the records by the medical examiner, Dr. Kiesnis? in
Yes,
this
I
case?
did.
Keisha. Okay, and, all right, I'm going to hand you, and it's already been admitted as People's Exhibit, a copy of the Office of the Wayne County Medical Examiner. And on that last page, there is a picture of a head in a shaded area, and it says GSW, correct?
Yes.
Gunshot wound. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but I'd like to just go back to the screen being down when the shot was fired. Is there anything from the medical examiner's report that supports that conclusion, the trajectory of the bullet?
The trajectory of the pellets, according to the medical examiner, as I recall reading, was front to back, relatively straight, and somewhat from the left to the right, as I recall.
Okay.
But it's relatively a straight-in shot, as I read the report.
Okay. And that does seem consistent with the straight shot. You would hold your hand straight out?
Well, the plane of the weapon has to be somewhere, the victim has to be somewhere in line with that. And the head is a very movable object, so if you tip your head up, you can look upwards, or if you're downwards. But it's such a massive wound that they were looking at. The fact is that it's a relatively straight-in shot. So
Okay. So let's say the screen was intact before the shot was fired. The medical examiner's findings wouldn't be consistent with that, would it? With it coming in?
no, the medical examiner's opinion wouldn't have anything to do with the screen being in or out. They're saying the entry of the pellets into the victim's head.
Why
What
hire a
would
medical doctor
necessitate
and
it, the
attorney?
victim would then
Because
have to be
insurance
looking
companies
up at
hire doctors to
somebody and
testify
be
against-
very close to the door to be able to get that angle into the head, which would be, I mean, if the head is in the position of my hand, that's a straight shot. But if the gun is up here, then if I position my hand down here, that's still a straight shot, but the head is now tipped backwards or whatever direction. So it's possible to do it with the screen in the original position. However, the position, the victim has to be much lower, and then the face has to be on the same line that the muzzle of the shotgun is.
So after reviewing the medical examiner's report, was how the pellets entered, well, I'll strike that. I'd like to go to what else we did when we were down at the firing range in the Dearborn Heights Police Department. Did you, I think you've testified that you've test fired that weapon down there.
Yes, I did. I fired it 4 times.
All right, can you explain to the judge what you did down there?
Well, Your Honor, I first looked at the screen to ascertain what type of damage was done to the screen. I've already looked at the photographs of the victim at autopsy to determine as best I could the type of wound available that was delivered by this particular
Sorry, I object. I
shotgun
just heard
bolt.
that he said that he relied on a picture taken of the victim at autopsy. Is that what I just heard?
Yes.
Okay, then I project because there has not been a single photograph of the victim admitted during the autopsy for this court, in front of this court.
Your Honor, Mr. Balish, is there anything else when, to determine the distance, the firing?
Yes, and shotguns are somewhat different in the way they're given a distance determination than handguns or rifles. And just to briefly explain, in a handgun or a rifle, you're normally going to have a single projectile that's coming out of the barrel, and then you're going to have a quantity of gunpowder that comes out after it. The closer you are to the muzzle of the firearm, the more gunpowder is going to be deposited on the surface of the person. So if a person is 1 foot away, they're going to be heavily contaminated with gunpowder residue, whether it's a rifle or pistol or a revolver. However, with a shotgun, you're dealing with a much different product because it's such a large caliber. It's a 12 gauge is approximately .729 inches in diameter at the muzzle, much larger than any of the other firearms that are available, say for 10 gauge or larger. And out of this comes a multitude of projectiles, and a lot of times they're filled with a buffering agent. And eventually, after the wads come out, then comes the firearm's residue. in determining distance from shotguns, it is by far the more accurate way to do it is the penetration, the shape of the wound itself, the damage done to the circular, the skin around the area, where the wads are, what you find there, and the buffering material. And in this case, there was an abundance of evidence on this case indicating this was an exceptionally close range firing.
Why do you say that? And what do you mean by exceptionally close range firing? How many feet?
In my opinion, the muzzle of this shotgun was less than 2 feet from the face of the victim at the point in time of discharge. That's very close. There's no other way to say it's not a close range shooting. The fact that all the wadding from this shot shell was in the wound cavity itself would tell, it should have told the investigators or the medical examiner, wadding doesn't fly very far accurately after it leaves the muzzle of the shotgun. So the fact that that was all in the wound canal should have told them this was very close shooting. The fact, or what should have been done in the reconstruction, and may I go back to this photograph if we're asking about that.
Yeah, and you're talking about the medical examiner's
This
report.
photograph indicates that this was the damage from the shotgun, and that is incorrect.
Why do you say that?
This is damage done to the face of the victim, and it's done by pressure, but the large portion that goes up from about here up to the eyebrow of the victim is a tear, and it wasn't caused by the shotgun, it's caused by the pressure, but it's a splitting of the skin. The actual hole of the shotgun is much smaller if they would have taken the effort to put that back together.
And how do you put the wound back together?
I'm sorry, what is he basing that opinion on? Because you can't get that from that picture. So again, he's relying on facts, not on evidence.
What are you relying on, sir?
The photographs I saw, the autopsy of the victim, Your Honor.
Mr. Balish and I can recall the medical examiner to get those admitted, but I can rely just on the shaded portion there about the wound and then the tearing.
I'm sorry, I don't believe that she can, because that diagram does not differentiate between where the exit or where the entrance wound is in terms of the damage, in terms of tearing and things of that nature. So I don't know how she intends to rely on something that doesn't even depict what she indicates it depicts.
Your Honor, may I ask the witness a different question? Let me ask this. All right. Let's say, have you had a chance in your experience to look at gunshot wounds?
Hundreds of them.
Okay. Have you ever been present during an autopsy?
Hundreds of them.
All right. And what is the best method, if you have a shotgun wound, what should the medical examiner do to determine where the entrance wound is?
Judge, I have to object at this point. She's asking him questions about something that's outside the scope of what you qualified him for. She's asking him to now testify as a medical examiner or as a forensic pathologist. He's only been qualified as a forensic expert in terms of his firearms comparison and ballistics and tool marks, as well as crime scene reconstruction. She's asking him now questions about an autopsy, and that's outside the scope of what he's been qualified.
Ms. Garland?
Your Honor, I do believe this could fall under both expertise. He has to do this with the course of his training. If Your Honor wishes me to qualify him as an expert in medical examinations or reconstruction, because it is a reconstruction, crime scene reconstruction, just with the body instead of the other evidence.
No, I think I'm going to sustain that objection.
All right. Do you know, through your being a firearms examiner or through crime scene reconstruction, one of those expertise, do you know the best way? Do you learn what a gunshot wound looks like on a decedent?
Object. What's the relevance of a gunshot wound? We're here for a shotgun.
Excuse me, a shotgun wound.
The fact you're differentiating between a shotgun and a gunshot is not a differentiable. They're a gunshot. They're both gunshot wounds or holes. The basis that I would probably offer to you is that if an unknown individual were to commit suicide with a shotgun, and many people have done this, and it's in the literature, and I've seen these multiple times, unfortunately, by placing the shotgun under the chin area, the entire top of the head usually is removed. That isn't caused by the shotgun pellets or the projectile that's within the shotgun. It's caused by the gases that are coming out of the shotgun. They're not caused by the projectile. And if you go back to look at it, the wound, you can actually reconstruct and see how that was the initial wound of entrance. That's sort of what I was trying to get to on the original.
Okay, and is that something you learned through your training as a firearms examiner or through your training doing, being present in autopsies?
Well, in my training, when you worked on a crime scene, you not only went to the crime scene, you also attended and participated at the autopsy of that particular crime scene. That's why I've gone to so many autopsies in my career. And it was not unusual to work hand in hand, and especially when you're trying to figure out distance or determination of the wound. And it was not unusual to be called back to the morgue by the medical examiners to ask my opinion as to what I thought was the bullet entrance and bullet exit from the medical examiner's office.
So through your expertise as a firearm examiner, you learned this information?
Correct.
Okay, Your Honor.
And I can't stress it enough. It's the experience of having done it in actual scenes that is the most important.
Okay. Your Honor, I would still like to ask my witness about reconstructing a gunshot wound on a decedent and the best way to do it. Because I believe he just testified he's learned that through his experience as a firearms examiner, and that's what he's qualified as.
Based upon what he said, no, I will allow it.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Mr. Balish, let's go back to reconstructing a gunshot wound. Shotgun. We're just going to use the same word, gunshot wound, and it'll mean shotgun and
Right.
handgun. There's no difference in your mind?
No, they're both firearms wounds. One is from a shotgun, one a handgun or a rifle. They are different. They're distinctively different, all three of them actually. But as I told you before, the main differentiation when you're looking at a shotgun with a multiple projectile load is how it enters the skin and how the pattern appears initially. Not what happens after to the victim, but it's what happens initially at the point of entry that would give you muzzle to target distance.
How do you determine what it looked like as it entered a person's body?
Well, if it's as the deceased was in this particular case, you would physically try and place the skin back in its original position.
Okay, and do you do that with stitching, or can you just manually put the skin back?
Normally you can manually put it, it is, not meaning any disrespect, but it is a cadaver at that point in time, and you're trying to manipulate and get it back, the skin, and you're trying to close the ripping and tearing of the tissue and putting it back to its, close to its original position so you can ascertain what the size of the actual entry hole was.
Okay, were you able to ascertain that from any of the medical examiner's documents that you received and reviewed?
I have to object, because there were only certain things that were admitted in terms of the medical examiner's report and his sketch, that I don't know if that's what he's relying on, or if he got more than that.
We're going to have to have me elaborate a little bit on what he's relying on this testimony on. I would agree with that.
Okay. Are you relying this testimony on the documents you have there from the medical examiner?
The documents and the two photographs taken of the victim's face at the medical examiner's office, one with a I believe it has a measure in it, and the other one does not. But those are the main ones for that basis.
I'm going to object to any conclusion he makes upon that basis, because it's facts, not evidence.
Okay, Your Honor. I will move along. Were you able to, you said you test-fired the gun. Did you bring the cutouts that you fired?
I did.
Okay, and would that be of relevance for the judge to see how you determined the range of fire?
I believe it would.
Okay. Do you have those with you?
I do with me. They're here.
Okay.
One rubber band as well. It's every other one, so you understand that.
Can I have a minute to look at these?
Yes, you can.
And can I go in there?
Well, yeah, you can go in there, I guess.
I get it.
Well, we'll take 5 minutes.
Do you have any comments? I understand. Nicole. Talking. Okay.
Thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Remain seated. Court's back in session. Yes.
Mr. Balish, I'd like you to look at what's been marked, there's some extra paper here. Defendant's exhibit, proposed exhibits 4 through 7.
All right, stand up, Your Honor.
Yes.
I've seen these.
All right. And are they in the same condition, substantially the same condition as when you did your test on them?
They're in substantially the same condition, not the same condition that when the test was finished. And I'll just show you on the very back one, which would be defendant's number 7.
No, we don't need that one, do you?
On defendant's number 7, Your Honor, it's in essentially the same condition, but it's not totally damaged. However, there's nothing been done to the back of it. On defendant's number 6, however, because of the damage done during the testing at this particular distance, there's an amount of tape that was placed to the back to keep those together to prevent them from flying around so that the court could receive an accurate view of what these tests look like. And that goes for defendants 4 and defendants 5 as well. I wanted to point that out to you.
Your Honor, at this time I move to admit
So
defendant's
admitted.
exhibit 4 to 7. Okay, can you explain what number 4 is and what test you did?
I would prefer to go from 7 if you don't
Oh,
mind.
that's fine.
People's
Would
exhibit
you like
number...
me to hold that up?
No, that's
Okay.
fine. People's exhibit 7 is a test utilizing the submitted, or the shotgun in evidence. It's a paper cutout of a silhouette of a man, and what this target shows is that the muzzle of this shotgun with the same buckshot, number 4 buckshot, 12 gauge, found at the defendant's home, the muzzle was held at a distance of 3 feet from this target at the time of discharge. And this is the resultant damage that one sees. And you can see the overall size of the hole is approximately 2 3/4 inches by 3 inches. And all this little peppering material you see around there on the outside, all those damaged areas, the vast majority of those have been caused by the buffering material that was contained within the buckshot to keep it separate during its transition. So this is the first test I did at 3 feet.
Okay. How about we, because of the nature of the time of the day, is it okay to go to the exhibit that you believe represents the distance the firearm was shot?
Well, the closest approximation that I came You're saying the distance from where to where? Please be specific.
The distance from the muzzle to the decedent, from the muzzle to the decedent.
There's two things that are in conflict. I have to use these for the decedent, but for the screen, it's a different distance. The decedent, in my estimation, would have been no closer or no further away from the point of discharge of the muzzle of the firearm than, I think I have it out there, I'm sorry already. I didn't hear you, Your Honor, I apologize. It'd be no further away than 2 feet. It actually had to be less than 2 feet based on what I'm seeing and not being able to reconstruct the tissue back to the way it is. If I could have seen that reconstruction, chances are very good that it would have been closer.
Okay. So that is defendant's exhibit.
Number 6.
Okay, and that represents a distance of
Muzzle
2
to
feet or
target.
less.
Muzzle to target of 2 feet.
All right. And in your expert opinion, is that the distance which happened in this incident?
It can't be any further away than 2 feet. It can be closer. This is the maximum distance it can be away. It can be closer, but it cannot be further away.
Okay. Have you had an opportunity to review the medical examiner's opinion that there's no evidence of close-range firing?
Yes,
Do you agree with his opinion?
absolutely not.
Why not?
It's very difficult to understand that opinion based on the wound itself and what I see in the wound itself. I can see numerous instances and what the medical examiner himself states was removed from the wound cavity, being the pellets and the wadding material. Because it's a shotgun, it had to be close. It is not possible to have been a distant shot.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
What is your definition of close-range fire?
My close range firing for handguns and rifles would be the closest that gunpowder will deposit on a target, and that's normally between 4 and 5 feet would be a close range shooting. On shotguns, you can get a little differentiation, and you can actually go much further away if it's a bird shot or a multi-product in the shotgun, because on many instances, for example, if I were to shoot to the back of the room with this particular weapon loaded with this ammunition, it would leave a fairly specific type pattern on the door, and you would try and replicate that. So you can get a much further distance with a shotgun as opposed to rifles and pistols where you're relying solely on gunpowder.
All right, so your definition of close-range fire is anywhere between 4 and 5 feet. Is that what you testified to?
No, I said gunpowder will deposit out to that, so it's anywhere from muzzle, from contact out to 4 or 5 feet, anywhere within that pattern, whether it's a handgun or a rifle. With a shotgun, it's a relative term. If I were to shoot somebody from 10 feet away, some people say, well, that's not really a close range, and yet if you shoot somebody at 10 feet and then at 100 yards away, 10 feet is much, much closer, so it's a very relative term. To be close range, you would have to be in a shotgun before it begins to open up in its pattern would be close range firing. This type of weapon, because of the cylinder bore, would be even closer because it would open up so much faster.
You're aware that there was no soot or gunpowder stippling found on the wounds of Ms. McBride? Yes or no?
That's what's in his report. I disagree with that.
Based on what?
Based on looking at the photographs that are not in evidence. I apologize.
So then you can't give an opinion as it relates to that?
Your Honor, the prosecutor might have just opened the door to that. She just asked him, and he can answer.
Because I don't have the facts of which he is basing his opinion on, which I had requested before we ever started his testimony. So you can't bind me because of that.
Go ahead.
Now, in terms of your analysis of this gun, did you ever do a safety inspection on it?
Yes.
Okay. And did it discharge without you pulling the trigger?
No, it did not.
Did you do any sort of drop testing where you literally drop the gun on the floor and have it discharge, or not discharge?
No, there's no real reason to do that. There really is not.
Okay.
With this weapon, it's got a pistol grip. It's not going to strike. There's a difference between a pistol grip and one with a buttstock, because a buttstock would transmit the energy through it. The pistol grip is offset from the sliding mechanism itself. It would pivot the gun. It wouldn't be an accurate test even if you were able to do it. So on this construction, it's not a test you would do.
So it would be ridiculous for me to ask either you or even MSP to do that testing? Because
I would, with the drop test, that is correct, but not a test for its safety and functionality.
Now, sir, now, in terms of this case, you were not asked about it on direct examination, but did you in fact do a trigger pull?
Yes, I did.
And how many trigger pull tests did you do?
Probably half a dozen or maybe more.
And what did you find?
I found that, and I'd have to describe it if you don't mind, I'll show it.
Absolutely.
The weapon, I hold the weapon in this position, and I use a set of NRA weights.
I'm sorry, and for the record, you've got the gun pointing toward the ceiling.
And it was pointing towards the ceiling at the time. And I will close the mechanism and reopen it. There is no cartridge in the weapon, and the weapon is empty, but it would be in this position at the point in time, so it could be fired. I'm just going to trip the mechanism and reopen it, but it would have been in a closed position, ready to fire, but it would have been empty at the time. And what you hold it perfectly parallel, and you set the weights, and there's a little bar that sits across the trigger, and you attempt to pick up the bar and how much weight it will hold. And I found that this particular weapon in this position will hold 5 pounds and will fire at 5 1/4 pounds.
Firing at 5 1/4 pounds, was that the same result that you had all half a dozen times?
No, you can get different results if you, for example, if I use the same weight where it held 5 pounds, and I'll just turn, I apologize, I feel more comfortable in pointing the weapon. If I were to turn like this, now the weight is going to hinge more on the lower part of the trigger, and like a fulcrum, it won't take as much pressure to function it in this position. So you try and do it over and over to make sure you're going as accurate, as perpendicular as you can. But if you were to go forward and use the lower portion of the trigger, it would probably be slightly less.
So in terms of where the weight sets on the trigger itself can affect the result going either up or down?
Correct.
And do you use a digital scale or do you use literal weights?
I use both on this one. I use literal weights for when I give an opinion of between 5, it held 5 pounds and it fired at 5 1/4. Those are actual weights. I have a digital scale that I used 3 or 4 times to confirm it. My digital scale read that it averaged 5 pounds 7 ounces when it was on a digital scale.
And every time you did that trigger pull testing, the gun was, as you described, that it being the barrel pointing skyward?
On the weight test, the digital test does not have to be that way. It's parallel to the ground because you're pulling the weight towards yourself. It's not the same.
And in terms of the digital scale with the gun pointed straight forward as it would be if it's being fired, your trigger pull was higher?
No, it's just that the fact that the digital scale reads slightly different than the actual weight scale. It's like anything. Sometimes it'll read 5 1/2 pounds. One time it'll read 5 pounds, 9 ounces or something like that. This one ran just under 5 1/2 pounds, a few ounces heavier than what the actual weight said, but you're pressing it if you're slightly off in where you place the smaller arm in the trigger guard, you might get a slight difference. That's why you do it over and over, trying to get an average.
Now, in terms of the screen, do you have any idea what type of mechanism was used by the homeowner to keep this screen in place?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by mechanism, ma'am.
May I approach?
Sure.
This screen has to be held in in place by something in order for it to not fall out of the frame.
That is correct.
Are you familiar with what it is that actually held this screen in place?
Am I aware what they are? I am not.
You don't know, let's talk about what it is that you don't know. You don't know what held the screen in place, correct?
Correct.
You don't know how the victim was standing. You've given us some speculation in terms of where she was at, in terms of what you found, but you don't know the position that she physically was in at the time that she was shot, correct?
She was on her feet, upright. Other than that, I'm not going to, that's all I'm going to
You
comment
don't
on.
know where the defendant would have been standing when he shot Ms. McBride, correct?
Well, I have an opinion on how far the muzzle was from the screen, if that's what you're asking.
But no, I'm asking you if you know specifically in his house where he was standing at in terms of, where was he off to the left, was he off to the right, was he back, was he forward? You don't know any of that stuff, do you?
Or did he have it in his right hand or his left hand? I know none of that. That is correct.
You don't have any idea if he held the weapon down here, which is how most people probably would hold it, right? But he could have held it either at the shoulder or at the chest or even down lower than the waist, correct?
No.
If Ms. McBride was further away from the screen, wouldn't that lessen the angle as well?
I'm not sure it would lessen the angle. I think the further you go, the angle would remain the same. It's just that the position of the victim would either have to rise or lower. The angle would remain the same.
Now, you talked about the suicide example in that if the barrel of the gun is underneath the chin, it's literally going to blow the head off.
Correct, it does.
Ms. McBride's back of her head was not blown off in this case, correct?
I hate to repeat that I draw some opinions from photographs that are not in evidence. I apologize. But
Okay.
for your point, the back of the head was not blown off, but I saw what I thought was tissue. Where it came from, I don't know.
But even from the sketch that is in evidence, as well as the medical examiner's report, he didn't indicate that there was any sort of exit wound of any of these pellets or wadding or anything like that, correct?
That is correct, yes, ma'am.
Now, you've indicated that direct exam, that shotgun, gunshot, they're all guns that create this. But isn't it true that shotgun wounds are significantly different in appearance than gunshot wounds?
Again, it would depend on what's being fired and at what range. For example, when you say significant, if you're talking about a shotgun loaded with birdshot or buckshot, I would agree with you. If you're talking about a shotgun that's loaded with a rifled slug, and some of these slugs have sabots or encased materials that will separate much like a jacket, they'll present a wound canal very similar to a bullet. So those would make no difference. However, the majority of shotgun shells would cause a significantly different appearing gunshot wound than would a rifle or a pistol.
And that's what we have in this case.
That is absolutely correct.
Now, in terms of the wound that Ms. McBride suffered, the ripping and tearing, be it a tear, be it a rip, or what have you, all of that was caused by the blast in the face from the shotgun, right?
By the gas pressure and the damage, obviously, done by the pellets itself. The pellets begin it, and once the skin and the bone structure are ruptured, it is not as difficult then. Your skin is very tough material, but if you put a hole in it to begin with, now it's not as hard to rip it away, and it's the gas, in my opinion, that would have caused the major ripping that I saw on that particular photograph.
She wouldn't have suffered any of that had she not been shot in the face with a shotgun.
Absolutely correct.
Now, isn't it true that studies show that wadding from a shotgun can travel straight up to 50 feet?
The only one I would say that possibly fits that scenario would be those that are attached to rifled slugs like a Brennicky round. Wadding itself, you're correct, you can get shot cups and particles that may well travel 50 feet, but they won't penetrate. And the key element here is the fact that it penetrates. If you get much over 10 feet away, the shot wads that come out will bounce off most materials. They won't penetrate.
Now, you testified that on your exhibit number 7, which was the, what do you call those, the scatter
This is the distance spread pattern.
Okay, distance spread pattern.
It's
on
the one
your
that-
exhibit number 7.
It's the
You
3-foot one.
It was from 3 foot, and that the wound size was 2 3/4, I'm sorry, it's not a wound, it's a hole in a piece of paper. And you would agree that a hole in a piece of paper is significantly different than a face?
Obviously, yes.
Okay. But the size of that particular hole was 2 3/4 by 3 inches, correct?
Roughly, that is correct.
Well, if the size of the wound on Ms. McBride was 3.5 by 2 inches, isn't that comparable to what you found at a shot of 3 feet?
No, when you, and I apologize, but when you compare the photograph to this particular sample, I'm talking about the actual damage done by the shot is in this particular, may I write, Your Honor? Thank you. Is in this particular area right here. The damage that is shown in the medical examiner's drawing is a line that goes up from approximately this bridge area of the face of the victim all the way up to the eyebrow, and it's a simple split open. That wouldn't have been caused by this. If that would have been, if this damage had been caused by the shotgun, especially up by the eyebrow, then the victim would have had to have been back in this position, and you would have seen a different type of damage to the victim all the way up to the eyebrow than what is shown here. That's a clean rip of tissue, and that doesn't happen. This is at this point in time, that's a circular pattern. However, if the victim were head backwards, this is now an elliptical pattern that would come out. Because even though it's 2 3/4 inches high, if you turn it sideways, it's now only about 2 inches high. And it's going to come across in a more slicing, and that did not happen in this case. It's a direct shot to the face.
Can you tell me what blowback is?
Blowback refers to a number of things, and a lot of it, blowback can be blood and tissue, fibers, blowback can be gunpowder residue.
Let's talk specifically about blowback in terms of tissue, brain matter, and blood.
When you're very close to the energy source of a firearm, you'll get blowback. The impact is so horrific that the face is especially in the face area, is loaded with tissue and nerves as well as blood vessels and arteries. And when you impact it, you get high impact blood spatter that will come back towards the direction of the shot. And if you look at that screen, there is evidence of it on the screen.
How far can blowback travel, particularly from a shotgun blast to the face?
The blowback, it's difficult to get volunteers for this experiment, but once you get beyond about 2 feet, it's going to be difficult to get it all the way back because they're very small, high velocity spatter particles that you're looking at. The larger ones will travel further. If you get a substantial portion of tissue, it will come back much further.
And it can be a significant range, correct?
It can be, yes, spread.
Now, in terms of the time that you've spent on this case, how much time have you spent?
Probably 8 hours to this date.
And how much have you been paid?
At this point in time, nothing.
How much do you intend on getting paid?
It depends on when I submit a bill, and I think they're going to pay a retainer to me of $3,500, and I work from that retainer.
And have you worked off that $3,500 today?
No.
How much have you, in your estimation, earned thus far?
Normally what I tend to bill on what I think is a justifiable charge. I've spent 2 hours sitting in the courtroom. I suspect I won't bill at court rate hours for that time. So I'll look at each case, and as a general rule, I will tend to charge less than I normally bill for.
Okay, so how much do you intend to charge for the time?
I have no idea at this point in time, but it's less than $3,500 at this point.
Now, in terms of the screen, this gun, where the victim was at, where the defendant was at when he made the shot, there are a lot of things that you don't know, correct?
I'm not sure where you're going, but
Okay, I'll
either,
get to it then. You indicated that the victim in this case was approximately 5'4", correct?
correct.
Okay, well, I'm approximately 5'9", but I'm gonna get on my knees. And if I'm looking up at somebody who's presumably taller than me, and that shotgun is aimed down at my head, wouldn't that account for the angle in terms of the distance being greater than 2 feet and the injuries that Ms. McBride suffered to her skin, to her face?
As I said, if the person were in a down position and the muzzle of the firearm were held at that angle that you just represented to the court by being on your knees, and if her face was looking up at the same angle, it would be a wound of entry similar to what she had on that angle. That is correct.
And you can't tell us that that's not what happened in this case, correct?
Well, it appears unlikely at best because the hole in the screen does not give an indication that it's a downward shot. If it were a downward shot, you would see the damage on the screen and it is not there.
How is it that you can tell the angle based on this damage?
There's not very much damage to the screen, and the reason there's not a lot of damage to the screen because the screen itself is mostly air. So a lot of the pressure that's going on bypasses any material to be interacted with, and I would expect to see tearing and ripping in a pattern if it were pointed downwards as well as residue, and I didn't see that.
In terms of this screen, how can you tell us that all of this ripping down from here down is not from that downward angle? Because there's probably, what, 6 inches of downward tearing from the center of where this hole is, right?
I would agree it's about 4 inches.
Okay, 4 inches. There's 4 inches of tearing from what you've described as being where the muzzle came through, or where the shot came through, and there's approximately 4 inches of tearing below that, correct?
Correct.
Wouldn't that be consistent with the gun being angled downward?
I would go back to the same thing we were talking about on the victim's wound, that there was tearing to the facial tissue, and that wasn't caused, it was caused by the pressure, and it wasn't caused by the angle of the shot. The shot went in on a direct angle, straight into the face.
And what are you basing that on? Have you done that testing with this particular screen? Have you done the testing in order to form that opinion?
No, I haven't shot through a screen. I didn't have the opportunity to have a screen to shoot through it. I'd be more than amenable to be doing that. I have not had a screen to shoot through. I'm sorry, I had only these materials to work with.
Okay, so what are you basing that whole opinion in terms of she wasn't down like that, and the gun wasn't down like that, because the screen does not have the tearing that you would expect? What are you basing that on then?
May I approach the screen, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you. When you look back at the screen, if you put it together, this is a complete screen all the way to this point. There's no damage going down. So it's simply a split in the screen where the hole is present. You can see that. If it would have torn the screen as you were indicated by a lower angle of a shotgun, you'd see much more damage to the screen in that area.
Why?
Because that's the nature of what the shotgun blast would do.
Are you telling us that you can tell us, because I'm confused, and maybe that's just my lack of education in this area, but in terms of firing this weapon, you don't know how far the weapon was away from the screen, right?
I've not been asked that. I do have an opinion. No one asked me it yet.
Okay, well, I'm not going to ask that opinion. But, I mean, it seems to me that there's all these unknowns that you don't know, but yet you can say for certainty that the screen would have more damage. And I guess I'm just confused as to how you can make that opinion with all these variables that you don't know.
It's because of the opinion that I hold of where the shotgun was in relationship to the screen at the point in time of discharge.
What facts are you basing that opinion on?
The damage to the screen.
But you've already conceded that you haven't done any testing on the screen, or a screen at all.
But I've done testing here.
Okay, so you're comparing what you did with these pieces of paper with what this screen shows? Is that what you're telling me?
I'm extrapolating the results that I saw here as to the damage that I see on the screen. That is correct.
Okay, and that's the same thing that you're saying in terms of the wounds to Ms. McBride's face, right?
That is correct.
I have nothing further, thank you.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
May I have the excuse, Your Honor?
Hold on a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Did you go to the scene?
Yes, Your Honor, I did. Just to the outside. I did not go inside the home.
Did your analysis take into account doormats, heels, or anything like that?
I'm sorry, I did not hear. I apologize.
Your analysis didn't take into account, the positioning of the defendant, excuse me, of Mrs. McBride. Did it take into account any doormats at the, where she was
No, Your Honor,
standing? Did it take into account heels?
Yes,
She
it
had
did.
heels on, or you made a comment about the height of her and stuff like that?
Several things came into account that I looked at the scene. The height of the door above the porch itself was a major consideration. I did ask the detectives and was shown the shoes that Miss McBride was wearing the evening, and equated the heel was a very flat heel, so it wouldn't substantially add or, to the height of the individual. But one of the more important things was the final position of the victim herself. When you looked at that position from the wound that she suffered, how she would have had to have been positioned to get to that location.
So you've never actually, this type of weapon you haven't shot through the screen door, is that correct?
I have shot through screen doors with shotguns. On this case, I have not shot this shotgun with that ammunition through a screen similar to this one. That is correct.
So you wouldn't have an opinion as to if that shotgun could make that type of a hole on that screen?
I do, Your Honor, based on the testing that I did.
And
I would have to tell you what the distance I believe it to be.
could that shotgun make that type of a hole?
Yes,
That's-
if it were in a position, am I allowed to tell you that?
You're allowed to tell me.
It's my opinion that the shotgun, the muzzle of the shotgun was held virtually at contact or within 1 inch of that screen at the point in time that it was discharged. It was no further away from that screen than this at the point in time of discharge.
Any questions consistent to my,
What is that based on?
Based on the hole that I see in the screen and the testing that I did on these patterns here.
Okay, but not any testing of the screen, based on holes in a piece of paper.
Yes, I mean, I don't mean to belabor the point, but I can't shoot, for example, you have to shoot into paper or other material. I'd be more than willing to replicate all the tests with the screen material if you wish.
That's on the defense. Did you look at this particular hole to see if there was any soot or gunpowder stippling on the hole?
I did. The only thing that I found was small items that I would consider to be buffer material
Okay, so there's no soot, no stippling on the screen itself?
that I saw. That is correct.
Nothing further.
anything further, Ms. Cox?
Just quickly, I wasn't going to ask any questions, but there's been a lot of talk by the prosecutor that you have not shot through that screen with that gun. Have you, in your long experience as a firearms examiner and law enforcement, have you had occasion to look at screen doors that have been shot through?
Numerous times, yes.
Okay. And have you gotten your knowledge and education and experience through on-the-job looking at screen doors and seeing the patterns after shotgun blasts?
Correct.
Okay. And is there any question in your mind with regards to your findings in this case?
None whatsoever.
Nothing further.
Thank you.
Nothing further?
No.
Okay, you may step.
Did they want me to keep these, or are you going to keep them, Your Honor?
Yes. No, keep them here.
Well, thank you very much.
The ones that are marked, the ones that are not marked, you can.
I'll take, may I make a suggestion, Your Honor? The ones that weren't marked were placed in between each one of the ones that were marked, just to keep them separate. Is that all right to do that?
That's fine.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, we're gonna adjourn for tomorrow,
Okay.
9 AM.
That sounds good. Thank you, Your Honor.
Any scheduling conflicts, Ms. Clark?
No.
Okay, we'll adjourn until 9 AM tomorrow. Thank you.